Hi everyone. So we are looking at Clarke and his story, The 9 Billion Names of God. Now, let me make sure I get all my notes here. All right. So the story was published in 1957 by a guy named Arthur C. Clarke. He's British science fiction author. Considered in science fiction studies, he's considered one of the big three, they call them. That would be Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, and then Arthur C. Clarke. He was a very prolific writer. You might have heard of his book 2001: A Space Odyssey because of the movie made in the 70s by Stanley Kubrick. Childhood's End is another very famous book by Clarke. It's a very interesting one because of the three, Clarke is the one more comfortable exploring religious themes. He wasn't a religious person, but he liked the tension between science and religion. He liked to explore that. So in his book Childhood's End, these spaceships come down and just sit for 10 years in the sky above all the major cities on Earth. And they don't say anything. They don't move. So all of a sudden, here are these aliens, right? And now humans, we know that there's aliens, but they're not doing anything. And so after like 10 years, right, then the aliens finally reveal themselves. They wanted humans to get bored, to become comfortable with, aliens, who cares? Because otherwise it'd be panic. Well, the funny thing is that the aliens come off the ships, and they look like a spitting image of like the devil. They have the horns red, their skin is red, they have a tail. And so he's playing around with these concepts a lot. Isaac Asimov, Rendezvous with Rama is another book by Clarke that's good. Asimov was probably the most prolific, maybe most prolific author ever. I don't know. He wrote and edited over 500 books in his lifetime, and approximately 90,000 letters. And this is typing them out on paper, mailing them. He was a professor of chemistry. I think at Boston University, and he was the guy that people would call when they had, like, science fiction authors would call when they had questions about, like, how do I solve this issue in my story? And he would say, oh, well, you need anaerobic bacteria or something. Very, very, very intelligent guy. And they asked him if he had 1 minute left to live, what would he be doing? What would he do? And he said, well, I'd type faster. Because he was just constantly churning out material. Heinlein, interestingly, if you go and read his stories focus more on like military themes. He was in the military, and Asimov's way more about like science. Heinlein is way more about like structure, like society, and the military in relationship to technology and science fiction. And then, like I said, Clarke, much more interested in like religious themes. Clarke, interestingly enough, in 1945, he proposed a geosynchronous communications satellite. He didn't invent the satellite, but a geosynchronous is just where the satellite stays positioned above a single spot on the Earth. So geosynchronous, sum chronos, synchronous means with time. So like all of our GPS satellites are geosynchronous. So they're all fixed in a position. And so thanks, Arthur C. Clarke. He worked on what's called hard science fiction. Now, hard science fiction means that the technologies, the science fiction-y elements have to be at least plausibly scientific. Okay, it's not. There's no magic. There's no like, if something teleports, it has to be. There has to be some plausible scientific explanation for it. So you don't see a lot of crazy technology in Clarke, as you would in some other science fiction stories. So let's go through part of the story. The story is really short, and that's why I like teaching it, because then you all can read it and reread it and then think about it. So the main characters are Dr. Wagner, the High Llama. The engineers kind of jokingly refer to him as Sam Jaff or Jaffe. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. He was a Hollywood actor from Arthur C. Clarke's day. I don't know who he is. Then George and Chuck, the two engineers, and then the monks. So the setting is two places, New York and then Tibet at a monastery. Now, since this is a lit class, I can't, I won't harp on it too much, but in literature we want to think of finding metaphors, okay? So for example, if the motion or the movement of the story is moving from west, the west, New York, to the east, Asia, okay? How can we read that? If we were looking at it metaphorically, it might be, going, because, the sun rises in the east, sets in the west, so we think of that as the normal progression, right? This could be we could read it metaphorically, right? Maybe as if going back in time, as if maybe progressing or regressing, right? There could be, we could read elements of that as maybe Clarke making a critique of the East. I don't think he was. I mean, he ended up living in Sri Lanka, I think, for a large portion of his last years. But I mean, these are things that we can think about, okay? Everything is potentially open to interpretation. Now, there are a lot of moments of irony in this text, okay? So I just want to identify them here so that when you're rereading the text, you can point those out, okay? In literature, we're almost always trying to identify themes, ironies, looking for metaphors, looking for connections. How do these things all link up? So you'll see that at one point that the High Llama hires this computer with a credit card. Now, why is that ironic? Well, because he's a Buddhist priest. They're not supposed to have these sorts of things. Now, you might say, like, oh, well, as a convention of just needing stuff in the world, I mean, Buddhist priests need to eat too, etc. But the idea in Buddhism is that you are rejecting the world. You're rejecting worldly possessions or enticements. That's why they shave their heads. That's why they all wear the same clothes. And it's always funny to me, because I haven't taught this story in a while, but I used to teach this and some others when I lived in Asia, in Korea. And so you would see, and I saw them when I was just back this winter. You'll see a lot of Buddhist monks there. They have the shaved heads and everything, and they're on their phones. It's just cute, So you can reject everything else, but the phone, that's the universal. So the monks in the monastery, when the engineers get there, they go to town to drink and for sex. This one is really important, okay? That religion enlists science to answer a question, okay? So the science here, I put it in quotes, because, it's technology, but you could read it metaphorically as science, okay? So normally we don't think of science and religion as being, right, commensurate. There's an image of some prayer wheels powered by motors. Okay, this is ironic because we shouldn't power them because the prayer wheel, if you ever see these temples, you walk by these poles, okay, and they have these little wheels with words on them, and as you pass by them, you touch them and spin them, and that is a symbolic gesture of kind of like offering a prayer. It'd be like crossing yourself in Catholicism. So it's kind of it's a religious gesture. There are two images that are similes. One's an image, one's not an image, but they're both similes. Okay. The TV commercial is described like manna from heaven, and there's a plane like a crucifix somewhere. The battered old DC-3 lay at the end of the runway like a tiny silver cross. Gosh, why does it do that? I gotta change the settings on this. Like a tiny silver cross. Okay, so there's that moment. The manna one is somewhere up here. Even the sight of a TV commercial would seem like manna from heaven. So a TV commercial and a plane. Why are these ironic? Well, just like I said, like putting science and technology, right, in combination with religion, pushing those together. Here we have, through the simile, a TV commercial would be more or less a scientifically symbolic or metaphoric thing, right? TV is a technology, right? But manna from heaven, right? That's a religious thing. The food falling from the heavens, right? So the miracle here is that he's putting these things together. Sorry, I live near a road and there's a lot of trucks that go by. Here, same thing with the plane, plane, technology, right? Science, and then silver cross, right? Religious symbol. So yeah, I just want to point that out. Here's an irony, that science is able to answer a religious question. Okay. God's name is made into math, which is actually a very Platonic thing. Plato would have agreed with this. There's a structural irony that, spoiler, the story ends as the universe is ending. Okay. There's another structural irony that to name God in the story is to find what? Right? Destruction. I mean, it destroys, right? As it says here, to name God creative destroys the universe. Is Clarke implying that some things are better left ambiguous, right? Yeah, so, and what's the possible irony in comparing Buddhist versus Christian conceptions of time or of the soul? Okay, remember, these Buddhist monks, or Buddhism in general, believes in a cyclical kind of universe, very, very similar to Hinduism, where the universe goes through these big cycles, okay? And they would also believe in things like reincarnation, that you die, right, and then are born again, so it's cyclical, okay? Whereas Christianity in the West typically tends to see time as linear. So this, God spoke the universe in the Bible. God spoke the universe into being. And then the universe is going to do this, and things happen along the way, and then revelations at the end. When we put these things together, we find a central paradox, and this is where I want you to focus a lot of your attention, because this paradox is what is going to be the one of the central ideas for the final paper. Okay, so religion asks science to answer a religious question. Okay, they buy the computer, and then it answers a religious question, and that science can in fact answer it. Right. So here we get this religious, or this paradoxical structure between science and religion. We think of them normally as, right, separate. They can't talk to each other. They don't speak the same language. Clarke here, I think, very cleverly puts them together and creates this central paradox in the story. We normally think of these as incommensurate. Which one was correct? Right. So remember, in the point in the story is that they've been. Let me find the story. So what they've been doing is, he says here, call it ritual if you like, but it's a fundamental part of our belief. All the many names of the Supreme Being, God, Jehovah, Allah, and so on, they're only man-made labels. There is a philosophical problem of some difficulty here, which I do not propose to discuss. But somewhere among all the possible combinations of letters that can occur are what one may call the real names of God. By systematic permutation of letters, we have been trying to list them all. And so that you see here, this is the math part. So what they've been doing is they've been combining all these letters, writing them out by hand. Okay, so they write out A, right? That's one potential name of God. B. There's another potential name of God. C, etc. So what they're trying to do is find the real name of God. Now you see that this isn't exactly math, but it's a formula. It's code for math. Now, what's the real name of God? Well, once they find it, right? What does he say is going to happen? Sorry. So they've been writing this out by hand. Now, why do they hire the computer, or buy the computer? Well, it's to do this process more quickly. And you got to remember back then in 1957, a computer would have been probably like the size of a living room. These were, your phone is vastly more powerful than any of the computers that they had. Like the moon landings, the computers on those craft were incredibly simple, and maybe that's why they worked. Who knows? Okay, so you see that that's kind of the setting. Okay, that's part of the plot. So there's so which one was correct? Well, they're both correct, because science is able to answer the question, right? But religion asked the correct question. Okay, so they're both technically correct. Now I want to point this out because there's a scientific paradox in here too, that is easy to miss if you're not paying attention. So C in the famous E equals mc squared formula by Einstein, C is the speed of light. It's about 299,792,458 meters per second. That's how fast, it's a constant. So that's how fast light travels through a vacuum, okay, through outer space. Pretty fast. Translated into miles per hour, it's 670,616,629 miles per hour. Okay, pretty fast. So to explain how light works, because light travels at a constant speed, right? It takes, for us, somebody shines a flashlight, it's instantaneous because we're so close. Well, if you're a light year away from something, okay, if this star suddenly, somebody turns it on, if it's a light year away, it's going to take 1 year for that light to appear to you. You won't see anything, okay, for a year because that light is traveling. And then after you see it, then it's constant. So every star that you see up in the sky, and every dot you see up there is a star. Other galaxies are too dim. There's one galaxy that's bright, just bright enough to be able to be seen, but it's if there's any light pollution, you can't see it. So every point of light up there that you see is a star, except for the couple of planets that are visible. Here's a fun fact in case you didn't know. The way to distinguish between stars and the planets, if you don't know when the planets are up and down, stars twinkle because their light is being kind of broken down in the atmosphere. Planets, because the light is much closer, they don't twinkle. So if you see something up in the sky that's not twinkling, that's one of the planets. Okay. So anyway, light takes, if it's one light year away, light is it's going to take 1 year to travel. Okay. Light from our sun takes about 8 minutes and 20 seconds to reach us. Here's a fun fact. So this photon leaves the sun and is flying through space for almost 8.5 minutes before it hits our planet. If the sun were to just suddenly disappear, so if the sun just went out for just poof, somebody magic disappeared, we wouldn't know for 8 minutes and 20 seconds. It would look like, yeah, there's the sun, I'm gonna go get a tan, and all of a sudden it would just go bloop, and darkness. And what's interesting is that if the sun disappeared, the Earth in its orbit would just shoot off into space, because gravity, and this is, like I said, wow, something that we haven't yet figured out, gravity also seems to move in similar ways. So we wouldn't know it, and then all of a sudden it would go dark, and our planet would shoot off into the void of space. Be a pretty bad day. So here's the paradox in the story. Okay, remember at the end when it says, they get down the valley, and it says one by one the stars were going out. Well, if you think about it like this, here, if this is our galaxy, the Milky Way, the Milky Way is about 100,000 light years in diameter. Okay, so this star over here that's very distant, it's going to take 80,000 years for that light to travel to us. If this closer star, it might take 15. But if one by one the stars are starting to go out, that means what? That they went out thousands, if not 80,000 years, tens of thousands of years ago. Okay, so before the question was asked, right, the stars are going out, which means what? That so like I said, this is part of this paradoxical structure. If the monks hadn't started this project and hadn't asked science, would the stars would they still be going out? This is very ambiguous. And so don't try to think like, oh, there's a definite right answer. No, this is an ambiguity. Okay, but this is definitely something that Clarke is playing with. Okay, he would have known that there's no way for this to actually happen. He knows the speed of light. He knows the science. Okay. But it's something to think about in terms of the paradox, and it's also something to think about in terms of the two philosophers that we've been reading. Okay, so how could the stars be going out one by one if they hadn't already gone out at various times, tens or thousands or tens of thousands of years apart? Okay, for this one to go out and this one to go out at it would have to be different times, right? If the light reaching the Earth all day, every day, you see that this is going to take this longer. But so if they're going out at the same time here, it means that they went out at different times. So it would kind of imply what? God. Even though, right, the paradox of the religion and science is still valid. Okay. If they hadn't asked the question the monks hadn't asked the question, tens of thousands of years ago. So who was right? Who was wrong? Right? Now, think of the two views of the absurd offered by Camus and Kierkegaard. Okay, Camus dealing with fate, our relationship to our ultimate fate, death, and then Kierkegaard, right, trying to reconcile the notions of faith and rationality. Our rational mind wants to try to make sense of things, right? But it can't make sense of faith. And so when you're faced with that, it causes the rise of this absurdity, right? I can't reconcile. And Kierkegaard says you have to step beyond that. It's often attributed to him, but it's not his term. But he says you have to take that leap of faith. Okay, so there's no rational justification for it. Just as there's no rational justification for a paradox. You can't resolve a paradox rationally because it's true and false simultaneously. So, what's the story's sense of fate? Right? That it ends. Okay, so there we could tie that and potentially tie that into Camus. What is the sense of faith, right? Is it positive or negative? You know, it seems that the religious view of things may have been correct in the story, right? So you see, they both have validity. They're both right and wrong at the same time. Okay, the monks were correct in the asking of the question in their methods or whatever, but needed science. In fact, their method is mathematical, right? Now here's another fun question. Aren't the monks imposing their religious views on everybody else because they want to solve this question for them, you know, for their edification? But Buddhism is just one of many religions in the world, right? I mean, I don't want the universe to end. I don't want to be flung out into the dark void. That sounds uncomfortable. So you see that that might be also kind of Clarke's point that you know, maybe imposing these kinds of beliefs on others who might not want them could be coded as you know, a type of destructive force. So yeah. So that's those are the central ironies, and then the very central paradox in the story. But I just wanted to mention this because it's really easy to miss. I mean, it's an interesting ending. You know, the stars one by one going out. But when you look at the science of it, it's like, wait, how could that be? You know, it creates a kind of scientific paradox. So yeah, so they're science, religion, both correct technically in the story. So how do we read that in relationship to the absurd? So that's what I want you to do for the final. Let me find your... Okay, so if you look right here, here's your final paper outline. Okay, in fact, I didn't put it up twice. That's going to bring you to this. So your paper should be 4 to 6 pages long, correctly formatted, you know, double spaced, 12-point font, normal stuff, okay, with citations, because most of you got these like sort of correct. Some of you did actually almost perfect, but needs citations. So you're going to be referencing at least 3 authors. If you have a hook, right, for your opening quote, that's going to give you at least 4 citations. That's in more than enough, although you could have more, for a 4 to 6 page essay. In fact, 5 is probably the happy medium. So you're going to read the 9 Billion Names of God using Camus', I forgot to put him in here, Kierkegaard's idea of the absurd. Okay, so you can, if you agree more with Camus or more with Kierkegaard, then what should you do? Well, you're going to read the story in relationship to, right, one of those authors or the other. Now think back to the structure. So if you let's say you side with Camus, okay, he's going to be the main, the core of your thesis. Where can you put Kierkegaard? Well, you can slip Kierkegaard where? In the comparison-contrast paragraph, okay? So you don't have to try to balance Kierkegaard and Camus, okay? But I think that Clarke's story does fit thematically with both of them, actually, and their view of the absurd. So you're using the absurd as an idea, as a metaphor, to read the paradox, to read the ironies, to read the text. Okay. So you can go through these questions are all, or these points are all about trying to prompt you to think about this essay. Okay. So here's our rough thesis. Camus seems to say that humans should submit should not submit to, but resist the biological fact of, I hate typos. But resist the biological fact of our mortality. This paradox between determinism and free will creates a type of modern theodicy, blah, 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 okay? I have not talked about this paradox yet between determinism and free will, but that will be in a shorter second lecture. This is more to just get you oriented to the text. This one is going to require a little bit more focus. So your rough thesis should look something like this. Clarke's story, 9 billion, blah, 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 explores the traditional divide between science and religion by uniting them in paradox, a marriage of opposing ironies. So topic, ironies, that complement one another. Much like Camus' version of the absurd claim, Clarke suggests that there needn't be a divide between science and religion, blah, blah, blah. So you're just piecing this together, okay? Your topics are going to be connect. Like how does Clarke and Camus connect? How do Clarke and Kierkegaard connect? Yeah. So that should take you through to the final. So yeah, that's a sketch of Clarke. That's a sketch of the paradoxes inherent in the text. So yeah, determinism and free will. I will come back to that shortly. So anyway, I like to keep this relatively short, so I hope that helps, and thank you.